I still remember the first day I saw Mr. James crying. It was late in the evening, and I was sitting outside my house when I heard muffled sobs coming from his small apartment. The man was sitting on his doorstep, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. It broke my heart. James was a quiet man, a hard-working father who never complained. He lived alone with his 6-year-old daughter, Sarah. His wife had died during childbirth, and since then, he had been both a father and a mother to the little girl. He worked as a mechanic in a small workshop not far from our street. Every morning, I would see him holding Sarah's tiny hand as he walked her to school before rushing to work. People in the neighborhood admired him. A strong man, they would say. But that evening, as I watched him cry, I realized that even strong men have their breaking points. James worked hard, but life was not kind to him. His job didn't pay much, and no matter how much he tried, it was never enough. Some days, they barely had food to eat. He couldn't afford a babysitter, so after school, Sarah would sit at the workshop, watching her father fix cars. She never complained. She was a sweet child, always smiling. One evening, I saw James sitting outside with a torn pair of Sarah's shoes in his hands. He was trying to stitch them together with shaking hands. His fingers were rough and stained with engine oil, but he worked carefully, as if he was handling something precious. "James," I called out softly. He looked up at me, his eyes tired. "She needs new shoes," he whispered. "But I don't have money now." His voice broke, and he looked away. It wasn't just poverty that made life difficult for James. People were cruel. Some parents at Sarah's school looked down on him. They whispered about him, saying a man could never raise a child properly without a woman's help. Others accused him of being careless, saying that Sarah's clothes were always old and her lunchbox was often empty. One day, I saw him arguing with a teacher. Sarah had been sent home because she didn't have the correct school uniform. James stood there, holding his daughter's hand, trying to explain that he would buy it when he had the money. But the teacher shook her head and walked away. James carried Sarah home that day, his steps slow, his shoulders heavy. When he reached his house, he sat on the floor and held her close. "I'm sorry, my baby," he whispered, tears rolling down his face. "I'm trying, I really am." Sarah, too young to understand the weight of his pain, wiped his tears with her tiny hands. "Don't cry, Daddy, I love you." That was the day I went inside my house and cried too. One evening, James fell sick. He had been coughing for days, but he ignored it because he couldn't afford to miss work. That night, his condition became worse. Sarah ran to my house, crying, "Please help my daddy. He's not waking up." I rushed over and found him burning with fever, unable to move. We managed to get him to the hospital, but the doctors said he had pneumonia. "He needs rest," they said. But how could he rest when he had a child to care for? After a few days, James came home, weaker than before. He tried to go back to work immediately, but his body failed him. He lost his job. The workshop owner needed someone strong, someone who wouldn't call in sick. I watched as James sat in his small house, staring at the walls. He had no money left, no job, no food. Sarah sat beside him, holding his hand, as if she knew he needed strength. One night, I heard him crying again, but this time, his cries were different. They were deeper, heavier, the kind of cries that come from a broken soul. James started selling whatever little he had. He sold his radio, his tools, even his small table fan. He refused to let Sarah go hungry, but the weight of everything crushed him. One day, he came to my house. His eyes were red, He looked at me for a long time before he finally spoke. "I can't do this anymore," he whispered. "Sarah deserves better." I felt a chill in my chest. "What are you saying?" He took a deep breath. "I think I should give her up for adoption." Tears filled my eyes. "James, she needs you." He shook his head. "She needs food. She needs a future. If I die tomorrow, who will take care of her?" I had never seen a man so defeated. But before he could make any decision, something happened. The next day, Sarah disappeared. James searched everywhere, his voice breaking as he called her name. The entire neighborhood joined in the search, but she was nowhere to be found. James collapsed on the ground, shaking. "I failed her," he whispered. Hours later, a kind woman found Sarah sitting at the church steps, crying. When they asked her why she ran away, she said, "I heard Daddy say he will give me away. I don't want to leave him." That night, James held her close, crying. He promised her that no matter how hard life got, he would never leave her. The next morning, something changed in him. He went back to the workshop, begging for any small job. He worked harder than ever, taking any little work he could find. Slowly, life started changing. People in the neighborhood began to help him. Someone brought food, another helped pay Sarah's school fees. Bit by bit, he stood up again. James still struggled, but he no longer cried alone. He learned that being strong didn't mean hiding his pain, it meant fighting through it. And Sarah. She grew up knowing that no matter how hard life was, her father loved her more than anything in the world. Even now, whenever I see James walking down the street, holding Sarah's hand, I remember the nights he cried, the nights he almost gave up, but he didn't. Because a father's love is stronger than pain, stronger than hunger, stronger than the world's cruelty. And James, he's not just a father, he is a hero. Life is not easy for a single father. The world may judge him, the struggles may break him, but his love for his child keeps him going. Through the pain, through the tears, he fights. And in the end, love always wins. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and share. And if you know a single father out there, remind him that he is not alone. Subscribe for more emotional and powerful stories. Until next time, stay strong, stay inspired.